thanks for jumping on. We've got a handful of coaches here as well. We're going to pivot a little bit tonight since the rain canceled us. And we've got a good amount of coaches that have joined to discuss the players, coaches, parents evolution program. I'll go ahead and serve it over to you guys, and then coaches, feel free to jump in at any time.
Okay, go on, Mike. You want to begin? Go ahead.
Yeah, we kind of the itinerary, I guess, or the schedule for tonight, from talking with some coaches in the club and receiving some feedback through the coaches meetings we've had on those Mondays at Sunset Hills and out at Powerhouse. We thought we had mentioned a little bit at Powerhouse last Wednesday, I think it was, a little bit about warm-ups and that, and what the structure of warm-ups could look like before a game. And there are some external factors, obviously, with the amount of time you get and the space of the field, if you even are able to get on the field. But before we do that, I guess, are there some questions that you as coaches, have some thoughts about, or maybe wanted to ask? I know that not all of you are always able to attend those Monday and Wednesday meeting times. So I guess just to turn it over to you guys to begin with, if you have some questions or some thoughts that you wanted to share or talk about, and then we can move into, like I said, talking about the warm up and what the structure of that could look like.
I'll go. So what are your expectations as far as a warm-up, Mike?
Well, I don't particularly have any expectations necessarily. Let me ask this question, Chad. What do you do the warm-up for? What's the purpose of a warm-up?
Right now before my games, I do rondo boxes just to get the girls' heartbeat going. I mean, yeah. I don't have any set warm-up, to say the least.
Yeah, and what do you, because you never really know how much space and how much time you're going to get. On average, what would you say you usually get in terms of space and the amount of time to warm up?
I try to have my girls get to the game 20, 25 minutes early to get their stretching done. And then when we can get on the field, I usually have an average about 10 minutes to get them warm, get them ready to go, and do rondo boxes. If we're lucky.
Do you usually get some time on the field? And if you do, how much time do you usually get?
5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of approach it from two different paths. Let's approach it from the path that you really don't get any time on the field, and you just have some sliver of grass or turf on the side of the field. That'll be the kind of the first lens we'll look through. And then let's look at it through, maybe you are able to get some time on the field. Maybe it's 5 to 7 minutes. Maybe it's even more. Maybe it's double that. Maybe it's 15 minutes. And we'll look at it through that lens. And so kind of zooming out from the standpoint of a warm up, what you want to begin to think about is, because as a coach, and a little bit of this will be some repetition in terms of some of the thoughts or the responses we have, but they will all begin to tie together. So if you have your team intention, and I know for a number of Steamers teams, that team intention is from an attacking side of it, attacking side of the ball, not defending side, attacking side only. That intention is move the ball from one side of the circle to the other once they win it. So if you think about the objective of your warm-up, if you can begin to reactivate that reference in those players' heads, then it's more, to take the quote, it's more warmed up in their thinking than if they hadn't, or if they've just been told that. So one objective in the warm-up, and again, let's look at it through the lens of not having any time on the field. You just have maybe something that's big enough for a 4v2, 5v2, whatever that is. How can you begin then to warm that up? Because what you see most coaches do, and I don't mean most coaches in the Steamers, I mean most coaches in general, and the players are conditioned to do this. They have some dynamic warm-up that they do, and not that a dynamic warm-up, the benefits of a dynamic warm-up are good. You want to get, because if you look at the constraints of the body, you have to begin to warm those muscles up. You have to begin to get your heart rate up a little bit. That's a given. The question is, in what context can you do it? And can you achieve warming up the body and also warming up their thinking within the team intention? Because most coaches approach it as an either or. Oh, we have to warm up their body, but at the absence or the not taking into account, they're not warming up their thinking at all. And you have probably seen this where players get in those two lines and they're doing their dynamic stretching. And as they're doing that, most coaches would agree that they're not doing it to the full extent that they should be doing it, nor are they taking it as serious as what they should. And that many times can be a losing battle. So looking at it from a dynamic stretching standpoint, yes, it's good to gain the actions that a dynamic stretching warm-up takes in place or incorporates, but can you achieve the warming up of the dynamic stretching warm-up within the context of also warming up their thinking of achieving the team intention? And the answer to that question is yes. How can you do that? Similar to what you said, and again, just looking at it through the lens of not being able to get on the field, they could play, like you said, maybe it's 4v2, maybe it's 5v2, maybe it's 4 versus 1, 3 versus 1, 5 versus 3, whatever the space or the ability of those players allows. But then can you do it? Can you do it so that they are also achieving that team intention, moving the ball wherever they win it from one side to the other? And I know some coaches had even experimented in this last week of these vertical zones or vertical channels to become more concrete for the players, moving the ball from one vertical channel to the other. So instead of just saying move it from one side of the field to the other, they began to make it more concrete by saying maybe move it from this vertical zone to that vertical zone. Even in that 4 versus 2 or 5 versus 2 or whatever it is, even though the field might only be 15 yards wide, you could still put in 3 vertical zones and say move it from one to the other. But again, it just gets them thinking. That reference, once you've talked about it in practice, it's there, it's in their head. It just needs to be reactivated a bit or warmed up a little bit.
Hey, Mike, and wouldn't you say that there's only maybe 5 or 10 minutes between when a game ends or when your team is on the sideline getting prepared? Wouldn't it be ideal to have the same process or approach to where if you had 10 girls and maybe it's always the same, defenders are in a certain spot, offensive players are in a certain spot. And if you are playing, say, a 5v3 with 2 neutral players or 2 target players, then the brain starts to activate. So you're not only warming up the brain, but you're warming up the body, so to speak. And like you said, you could maybe even set out some cones to create some channels or, you know, challenge the girls to think about the channels without setting the cones out. Because where I think that, and I'm a victim of this too, going into before a game, you think, get as many touches on the ball, get your heart rate up, get your mind right, get prepared. And then they go out and you're like, we had a bad start to the game. And then you think, well, it was a bad warm up. But maybe if the approach is consistent and the way that you warm up is always the same, so that the girls have an expectation and they know, or boys, they know what to expect prior to showing up, And then the other thing is maybe asking parents to arrive a little bit earlier. And it's tough because some kids are coming from different sports or from different games. They're being subbed in, dual rostered somewhere else or however it ends up. But maybe that consistency and even as the coach is sending it out and saying, this is the warm up. This is how we're going to warm up. Share this with your kids. Then the coaches, hey, it's interesting. You could almost show the players the warm up in the training session, and the training session on a Monday night, the warm up could be what you do in a game. I'm trying to think about what you're saying and how to make it as easy as possible for the coaches as well as the players. But the consistency part has to be the most important, because when players know what to expect, they perform a little bit better. It's just natural. So, as our coaches are sitting here, however your numbers set up, you obviously want to have more offense than defense. And you obviously want to put players in their normal positions and try to orchestrate some sort of activity that warms up their brain as well as their body. So if we had a practice, probably next week, because I don't even think we're going to get out there tomorrow, it might be helpful for our coaches to send a message to both Mike and Bill, or I can create a text thread and have these conversations as we go into the weekend. Because one other thing that I've come to the realization is everything sounds really good until you forget about it in an hour. So, I can own part of that process of getting coaches aligned with you and Bill to make sure that there's a good communication thread, so that, hey, how the question is simple. How should I warm up my players? But also base it on the age group, right? Because the little ones is a different time frame than the older ones, and probably the sizes of the field too. So there's a couple of different factors, but I think the consistency would be paramount.
If we zoom out a little bit and think along these lines, what is soccer? Soccer is communication, right? Within that communication is your tactics, which enhances communication. It is decision-making in the what and within the how, and then it is execution of that decision. So during the week, you practice within those parameters. During the week, whether it was working in a capital C, more in communication, or a capital D and E, during the week, you have worked along those aspects. And now you come to your game, the most important part of your week, as far as this is a test for your players to see how they learn during the week, and if they can apply some of those things that they spent time on during the week. And now the game, and you're preparing for the game, and you can't control those external factors, the space you have or the time you have, but those are the same things that you would want to work in your warm-up. C, D, and E, C, D, and E, because you did this during the week. And the mistake that many coaches make, they just warm up the body, and Mike kind of referred to this, and we respect the body. Okay, we are warming up the body, but we are working on, in our warm-up, communication, making decisions, and then our execution. So we want to set this up before our game, and let's just hypothetically say that we have enough space to play 4 against 2. Okay, to play 4 against 2. And your team intention was to get the ball to the other side of the field. And now you have 4 players out there, and you have to think about what 4 players you are going to put out there and what that looks like. Okay. So if you were going to play, let's just say you've been working on some type of build out during the week, then perhaps in your warm up of 4, you would have a center back. You could have a fullback on your right, and you could maybe potentially have a midfielder or a center back on your left, and then a higher midfielder or a forward on your left. It would be to your benefit that, and this kind of goes along to what Jason you referred to, it would be to your benefit if that day before the game or the night before you wrote out what players you wanted in that 4 and what players you wanted within that 2, so that you could just tell them, Mary go here, Sally go here, and they would just go into that, because they're at a smaller scale, they're replicating their positions. And so if I'm the right center back and I have the right fullback on my side, even though it would be in a tighter space, we don't even know we're doing that. We're improving our communication. Okay. And if there was a midfielder, a center midfielder on my left, then that's the player I would be passing to during the game. Then I'm working on communication there. So you can set that up. You organize that so that in your warm-up, as much as possible, replicate that, what you did during the week, because you always keep in your thinking, what is soccer? C, D, and E. And you do that during the week with your practices. And then you don't want to move away from that when you start your warm-up. So maybe you're in a smaller area of maybe perhaps 4 against 2 in an area that is maybe because of the limited, because we don't know what the externals are as far as space. And we're in an area that is 20 yards long and 12 yards wide. And we have enough to play 2 of those games like that. And now we're warming up. And then can we expand it and start to combine those 2 games so that maybe we begin to play 8 against 4, because maybe we have more space in length and then we have in width, because there might be another field sitting right next to us, 20 yards from us. And so we could expand that potentially. And then whatever time we have, okay, we have explained to the players what we're going to do beforehand. And if we have 8-9 minutes before the game starts, we're out on that field and we just begin to play again. Now we have warmed up the body and smaller, we've gotten a little bit bigger, and now we're on the bigger field, continuing working on
That's a great point, Bill, to take what you're doing on the sideline and then taking it out to the big field. And I would even maybe make a suggestion for coaches to have the goalie inside that 4v2, behind, the 2 players, and communicating and warming them up. Because when you think of goalies in communication, it's so important, but yet how often do we really work the goalies out before a game in terms of communication? We probably get caught into that vortex of throwing the ball from side to side to the goalie, and the goalie dives and gets all muddy before the game and cold. Or, you could actually have them participating and rolling the ball out or using their feet and getting active that way too.
goalkeeper, right center back, left center back, higher, that's your 4 right there. Goalkeeper at the back, right and left center back, because they pass to them a lot during the game. And then a higher midfielder at the top of it, at the top of that diamond. And you have it set up right there with 1 field. And then you put, and then because it's your defenders, who would you have defending in the middle? Well, logically, if we look at it, it would make sense to have our 2 forwards defending against those players, right? We would have our 2 forwards in there in the center of the 4. They would be the 2, and they would be defending versus the 4, and they would be defending, and always have some small goals at both ends. Maybe it's 2 goals at one end, and then you have a counterattack goal in the event those forwards would get possession, and then they could have something to go.
And Bill, talk about that, because you say the goal going forward and having a target. Why is that so important?
Well, it's proven that when you set goals up in your And basically what we have set up is a passing game, correct? We have set up a passing game as part of the warm-up, and we started with a passing game. And when you set goals up, players then begin to, instead of the ball just being played around that word rondo, okay, players begin to look forward. Players begin to scan the field better and more often when there are goals at both ends, okay? And if I'm with the 4, we're looking to score a goal, okay? And those goals could represent, because you have your goalkeeper, your 2 center backs, and a higher midfielder, a goal on your left, a goal on your right, a small goal of a couple yards or so. What players do those goals represent? They're not really passing in the goals. They represent forwards, right? So the center backs are looking to pass into those forwards, which are in your warm-up, a couple cones, okay? And then you have another goal that could be set up behind the goalkeeper who was playing at the back of the diamond, okay? And if the 2 players in the middle, if they won the ball, they could try to score at that goal there. And because the motivation for them to get the ball and then just give it right back to the goalkeeper and start,
Right.
there's no motivation for them there. They want to score, they want to play. So when they have a goal, a counterattack goal to play, they're going to probably play. They're going to pick up their maybe their intensity a little bit, and you're getting that body ready too. Okay, because we respect the body, and they're beginning to pick up that also. And then you could just combine 2 games. Okay, it may not be the ideal area, but you're just going to have to deal with that. And then as soon as that's over, I have 8 minutes before this game, and we jump on the field right away because the players know what they're going to do right away, and they just run out there as fast as they can. You have your assistants help you, and they begin playing. And they begin playing the same game with obviously higher numbers, with higher number of players playing. 8 versus 6, 8 versus 5, along those lines there. You set up a couple goals at half field with your for them to pass into, and the other team has a counterattack goal also. And you take that 8 minutes and you just take and you use that 8 minutes, whatever they give you, and you don't move off the field until the very last second. When they say start the game and the referee blows the whistle, that's when you can move off that field and get them out there and get them playing.
Yeah. So I guess in review, in that warm up, you're trying to get prepared for the moment, which is the game. And you're going to use specific or maybe even situational phases that would solve some sort of tactical problem. So what you're saying is if we're working on channels, you want to refresh their memory, you want to get that established, and then you want to have corresponding principles that we continue to talk about, whether it's communication, decision, execution, and then you want to throw in those technical elements that can get kids ready to play. And like you said, after that game is over, they go out onto the field, they continue to work, and then they should know who the starters are. The coach should know who the starters are, and you continue to warm up until the very last second. When the ref blows that final whistle, the players that aren't starting go to the bench, the coach goes to the bench, and those kids who were just warming up, including the goalie, they should all be ready to go.
Sure, they could just stay up.
Yeah. Do any of the other coaches want to throw in any thoughts or observations based on that type of warm-up approach?
I mean, that approach sounds good. I mean, but like you said earlier, touched on, I mean, just getting girls, especially with the 09s, just getting them to the games, because there are a lot of them that are dual rostered. So like getting them there on time to warm up, but also if they are doing the same warm ups throughout every team, then no matter when they showed up, they should be able to jump in. Because I think this weekend, I think Mike was at the 2010 game on Saturday morning. We had girls from 3 teams playing, possibly 4, Chad, right? 3 or 4 teams. And then the 09 game was the same way, 3 or 4 different girls from 3 or 4 different teams playing at the 09 game later that evening. So, I mean, if we did the same warm-ups throughout, they would know where they fit in before they even got there. If they showed up 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later or were there early, like they would already know what to do and could do their static stretching or their personal warm up before everyone got there to start it. And then as they showed up, they would be able to just themselves go into the warm up without someone having to direct them, especially that 09, 2010 age group. I mean, 5th, 6th grade, 7th grade girls, they should be able to show up to the field and just go into a 5-on-2 game or a 4-on-2 game, even without cones, and know what to do. If
Well,
it was
and
consistent.
I also like the idea of going from on the field just to starting the game. I've never thought about that before. But when the ref calls you in, you know, right after the ref calls you in or right before, you're given the lineup, you're going through the kind of logistics, but your water bottles are set, your bags are put away, blah, 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 blah. So right after the ref calls you in, you're out on the field with that real last minute pregame warm up, so that whenever then the ref takes the field, we just pull off the non-starters. I think that's a real mental warm up right there. That's real getting in gear right away.
Sure, Abby, take advantage of every minute they give you. Take advantage of working on what soccer is and what you're trying to accomplish with every minute they give you before that game.
Take advantage of the minutes they don't give you, because
Yeah.
they're not gonna start the game without you.
Yeah.
And just to kind of reiterate a little bit about what Jason just said, and if you remember, Bill and I said this at the very first meeting at both Powerhouse and at Sunset Hills. There were two aspects of our conversation. There is what coaches should do in the warm-up. What we've spent the majority of this conversation is in how you achieve that. But what coaches should do in the warm-up, what your objective is for the warm-up, is to warm up the team intention at the same time warming up the body. The body is a piece of it. You can't get around that. You have to warm up the body. The problem is, as I said, coaches warm up the body at the expense of the brain. And it's only logical that this happens, given, in a half an hour, the big US Mexico game. And I had seen this on TV earlier, and they had some video about the US team. And for 4 or 5 minutes, they just showed the US doing some dynamic warm-up, running in 2 lines, doing these different types of stretches and these activities. And so as a coach sitting on my couch, if you don't think critically about it, what would you do then? Well, if it's good enough for the national team, it must be good enough for my 09 girls. So then you go out there and you do the same thing. And not what the US national team is doing is bad, because I'm not debating whether it's good or bad, but what you do, you have to warm up their body, but not at the expense of the brain. So that's the what. That's a given. That's for every coach in the entire world. If you don't want to warm up their brain, then you can warm up how you probably see 99% of coaches warm their teams up, because that's how most players do it. So if you want to combine those two things, again, which is what all coaches should do, because they all say that. What do we want to do in the warm-up? We want to get them ready to play. Well, getting a player ready to play warms the body up, but players have to think while they're playing also. So it would be probably a good idea to warm up their thinking. So what do you want those players to think about then? You want them to think about the same things that you've trained throughout the week and achieving that team intention. So getting them to move the ball in your 4v2, 5v3, 8v4, whatever it is, from one side to the other, that's achieving the team intention. Putting them into their positions improves their individual intention, being on the right back or on the goal player or on the midfielder, their individual intention. And we also know it improves the communication, the decision-making, and the execution of that decision. So what you do is warm up brain and body, warm up team intention, that's the brain, warm up individual intention, warm up soccer actions, CDE, and do that while also warming up the body. The problem becomes, and it's not necessarily a problem, it's just a factor you have to consider. Andrew, you brought up that 09 game. I hadn't gotten there for the entire warm-up, but I don't know if there was a team on that field before that 09 game. So I think that you guys had potentially like 15, 20 minutes of an entire half field. And that's a rarity. That's why I asked, what's it normally like? Because I walked out there and thought, holy cow, I wonder how often this really happens, which is probably very little. So if you have a whole, well, I should say a half of a field, maybe you do, if you have the numbers, play a little bit bigger game. But what they do is still all the same, whether it's 9 versus 5, or if you're only on a 20 by 20 yard slice of grass in between two fields, and you can only play 5 against 2. So how you do it, you got to take into account all those factors, because you never know what you're going to get. One weekend you're at Slice It and you have, the sideline. The next weekend you're at the soccer park and you go, holy cow, I have a half a field. What you would want to think about doing as coaches is just kind of play that out in your head and have that reference in your head. So, oh, I have half a field and I have this number of players. Okay, we can do this. I have a sideline and I have the same number of players. We are going to have to do that. But what you do is the same regardless.
And I agree. I really like the idea of having what we do being the same regardless, especially like Andrew said, with us sharing girls all the time. I think it's great to streamline our warm-up process. But I think you made a really good point, Mike, in comparison to the U.S. national men's team, whatever professional team it would be. Okay, so you would assume that a professional player comes, puts their shin guards on, puts their shoes on, and they're ready to go. They're a professional. They should be ready to go. We can't expect that out of our 9 and 10, 12-year-old girls, that mentally they're ready to go just because they're on a soccer field. So I know that one thing that I always get, girls are warming up and they're sitting on the bench, waiting for the ref, or they're sitting on the bench waiting for me to tell them their positions. And they're talking about, watermelons and pineapples and pizzas. Whatever they're talking about is far from soccer. So I like the idea of, at some point, barring the fact that, girls get there at different times or whatever, all the team is together so that everybody understands who's starting, so that we review this team intention, and then we're just on the field with, as close to game-like intensity as we can get until that ref blows his or her whistle with a ready to start. I guess I think that weeds out and that gets them mentally prepared, as opposed to talking about watermelons and pizzas.
And just view your pregame warm-up as a practice, because the interesting piece about youth soccer, everybody shows up for games. They always show up for games. So use that as an extension of a practice, and just view it as a practice. What would you do in practice? Okay, let's just do that in the game, because you never know what you're going to get sometimes in practice. Just like, and this ties into, Abby, what you were saying a little bit. If the call it a coaching intention, if the intention by all the coaches is the same related to the warm-up, how you do it is going to be different, because you don't know what mix of girls are going to show up at what time. They're not all going to show up at one time. You might have 3 right backs or 3 right-sided players and 1 left, or the goalkeeper may show up a minute before kickoff. So at least having that reference of, okay, right-sided players on the right side of this diamond, right-sided players on the right side of whatever it is, 2 diamonds on top of each other, goalkeeper at the back, center backs at the back, holding midfielder at the back, something along those lines that keeps their perspective, or what they see on the field and how they see it on the field, in the same context as what you're doing in the warm-up. But see the warm-up as an extension of practice, not something different, because the hope is what you do in practice is also what you want them to do in the games. So it shouldn't be two different things anyway.
And avoid going on the internet. Coaches should avoid going on the internet and seeing what Real Madrid does or the United States national team or anyone else, because you never know when you view that. You never know the externals. Maybe it's just part of their culture. They've been doing it for 50 years this way. Potentially they have some high number of injuries and they need to do some type of basic actions. Their players, you don't know the age of their players. Older players need a little bit more time, potentially with some basic actions. Maybe they have a conditioning coach that they have to justify his salary, and they just have to have him do something. Okay, and so then that you just don't know what the externals are, because one size doesn't fit all. You just have to think about what is best for your team, and what is best for youth players from a development perspective is you're always keeping that in the front of your thinking, that what soccer is, obviously, C, D, and E, and you're trying to improve that within your team and those individual intentions within that team intention.
This is great. So it might be helpful next week if we start to establish a warm up and communicate it to the parents from the coaches. And I think we can start to implement a lot of these great qualities that we're talking about tonight. Is there, and you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, do you have another topic that you want to transition to besides the warm up, or do we want to continue to have more in-depth conversation regarding warm up?
Let me say one thing about when you communicate this to sometimes players, but also parents. Explain to them why you're doing it that way, but be able to understand yourself why you're doing it that way. Because if you don't understand it yourself, it's really hard to explain it to someone else, because I've had that problem in certain respects too. So people will buy into it. The parents will buy into it if they understand why they're doing it, because the same trap that we as coaches sometimes fall into. Ooh, Liverpool did this. Ooh, St. Louis City did this. The same trap we fall into is the same trap they fall into. Maybe they have a kid at a different club or a different age group, and they see one thing, and then they see their kid on your team and they don't see the same thing, and now they start to question it. And then they'll really begin to question it when you lose twice as much as their other kid loses, because that's what they'll attribute the reason why you're losing or the reason why they're winning, when it may have nothing to do with that. But be able to explain why, and try and do that without any opinion about it. Because Chad, you had asked that question originally. Mike, do you have thoughts? Well, yeah, I have thoughts, but you shouldn't be too interested in my thoughts. You should be interested in what it is you want to do in the warm-up, and what it is all coaches should want to do in the warm-up. That's what you're interested in. You don't give a rat's you know what about what I think, because what I think has nothing to do with the answer that you want. And that's why stay away from opinions, stay away from experience, stay away from all that when you talk to, because talking to parents isn't much different than talking to players. They all think they know, but they really don't know. And that's not their fault. They have good intentions. They just don't know what they don't know. So the more you can explain to them why, the better off, or at least you have helped them better understand. Whether or not they want to agree or not is their choice, but you have presented it to them in an objective, no opinions way.
So Jason, just to start this format, I'm a visual learner. I like to see things on paper. I like to talk things out for sure. But if I'm going to design something or whatever, I like to see it written out or drawn out or whatever. Could we you know, you've got a couple of text strings going. Could we create, you know, I don't know if it would be boys coaches would be separate from girls coaches. That might make it easier. A lot of, because I don't know how much the boys coaches overlap with each other. The girls coaches certainly overlap. Almost all of us do. Not only players, but coaches. Couldn't we either talk to each other, what format works better, email or text, and start to hash through some of those ideas? Like if the topic is warm up, let's streamline the warm up. What does the warm up look like in terms of, you know, given 20 minutes of field time, what would a Steamers team be doing to warm up, a girls Steamers team be doing to warm up? Okay, then I shoot out, I text, I can, with my flexibility, I can text during the day. I also check my email during the day, so either one would work for me. But maybe, you know, I know Christine can't text during the day, she's teaching, but she checks in before the day starts and after the day, and we have this sort of dialogue going via either text or email that also could include diagrams or whatever to narrow down some of these ideas.
Yeah, we can put together a plan that would offer the visual side of it. You know, for example, for the Scursel kids, usually the coaches that are with me, I put together information so that you have it throughout the night. We can come up with a plan with Bill and Mike and do that exactly what you're saying. To me, the gender doesn't really matter because I think it's the approach and it's the quality of the approach and the intention of what a warm up is. It shouldn't necessarily matter for gender, but what it could change a little bit is age group and maybe the time frame, like you said. Maybe one game you got a field that you can just walk out to because you're the 8 a.m. game, and then sometimes you're on the sideline, and so you're tight on space. But the idea and the approach should probably be the same.
Because when you say idea and approach, you're talking about what the coaching intention is.
Mm-hmm.
How we achieve that intention, that's the piece you don't know, because you don't know how much space or how much time you have. But what you do is all the same.
Well, and I thought that the how should be, I guess that's what I meant by coaching genders, because I thought the how entails in the back of your mind, who are my players and what kind of warm up is best suited for them, so that the coaches that are coaching the same players are developing the how together. That's all I meant by, I mean, I don't think it matters gender wise otherwise, but you know, I don't coach any boys, so I don't know what works best for them.
Well, and like you're talking about like games having different time and amount of space. I mean, between Mini and Order Park, I mean, we tell the girls to be there 15, 20 minutes early for practice, and they're told to do their mobile stretching, calisthenic stretching. I mean, we could almost implement the game warm up starting before practices, because at Mini you have plenty of space if you would to walk up to a game 15 minutes early and have half a field. And in Order, sometimes they only have that little grass down the sideline or behind the goal. So you could almost, if we started doing it before practices, I'm there early enough to get them, once they learn it in a practice, for when they show up, they just jump in, do the warm up, and then when practice starts, they're already in that mindset. They've been doing a drill already unknowingly because they're just gonna think it's fun. And then you can move into practice instead of them waiting around talking, and kind of get them in that mindset to when they do show up to a game. Here's our drill. We do it before every practice. We know what to do. I know where I'm supposed to go when I show up. So just to make it even more streamlined.
And on top of that, I mean, as coaches, we know when we're going to fields and stuff, we should know the type of spacing we're getting to. For example, Lou Fuse, you got that one little field that the kids play on all the time before games. I mean, we could kick the kids off and utilize that in that space. I mean, we're a team. We got, I mean, why not utilize that space? I mean, If you're at
Yeah.
Slicer, you know you're not going to have very much room at Slicer. You're going to get a piece of grass. If you're at Belle Claire, you know you're going to get a piece of. You're probably going to get a slice of turf. I mean, we know as coaches where we're going prior to the game, so we should be able to plan accordingly before we get there on what our action plan of a course is going to be before we get there.
So you just, Chad, created your pregame space reference. You already know in theory how much space you're going to have. And now what you just said is there's not any reason for you to be able to implement that given what the space potentially will be.
Because at one place you may be able to do 5 against 3, and in another place it may be 3 against 1, right?
Correct.
And
Sport Port's a prime example. You're gonna do three versus 1 at Sport Port.
yeah,
Right.
So then the next step would be, okay, 3v1 is the solution. Now, how do you construct that 3v1? And we've talked about that a little bit. Who are the 3? Who are potentially the 1? Where the goals go? Okay, done. Oh, it's going to be 5 versus 2. Okay, who are the 5? Who are the 2? Oh, I got 2 more girls that just showed up. I can do this with them. I can have an extra set of 2 defenders, move a couple girls around, done. And so,
Sorry.
no, go on, Abby.
No, the other thing too is like at a sport port where you're usually waiting around for field time, and then when you get your field, you got what, 10 minutes. So while you're waiting around, you're in your circle that, step away from the parents as a team and say, all right, this is what our starting lineup looks like. This is, those are the things that you don't have to do once you get to the field. You can do and then you can go through, all right, when we get to the field, you're going to immediately move on to a 5v2 or a 3v1, blah, 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 blah. Explain all that stuff before you even can get on the field.
Yeah, and
I agree.
have given out, vests, or hey, Abby, you and Susie, you guys are going to be the 2 defenders to start. Make sure you got a vest. Go put it on right now. And like you said, Abby, what you're doing then is maximizing every minute of time, because you don't get as much as you want before that game. The lineup is given. They know who's starting. And basically, you can even, if you can construct the lineup from the 4v1 or the 5v2, then the people that are already in the vest could potentially be your reserves, or the people who are in the vest could potentially be your starters. But all that stuff is already known. So when you do go up to the very last 10 seconds before the referee gets a little irritated, you just call those girls off. Okay, girls, remember who's starting? Okay, let's go play.
And if you have, let's just go under the presumption that you have 7-8 minutes before the game begins, and you can jump on that field. You have them organized, ready to go on that and to begin playing. But you have no space at all to be able to do any 4 against 2 or 3 against 1 along the sides. It is an opportunity for you to do some reference coaching, for you then to begin to ask questions to players. And if you have an assistant, you say to the assistant, you take the midfielders and talk with them, okay, about what our team intention is and what are your individual intentions within that. And I will take the defenders, right? And I will talk with them, okay, about those individual intentions. And now you do get 7, 8, 10 minutes to get on that field. You've talked about that. You've done some reference coaching, some questioning before they even get on the field. Go out there and play. Go out there and play for the 8 or 9 minutes, whatever they give us. And so it's not time that it can be wasted. Use it to your advantage. And many coaches would think, oh, poor me, I don't have any space to warm up here and that. No, just do some reference coaching with them. Get them on the field. They give you 7 minutes before the game starts. You have them organized. You've done some reference coaching with them. They go out there and play for those 7 or 8 minutes.
Well, and I think that's one of my favorite things about what we've been doing here in the last couple of weeks is that because we have so many coaches that are equally comfortable taking the lead, equally comfortable that we just overlap in knowledge and comfortability so well. I love, like on Monday, for example, when Dan took the defenders and I took the midfielders and Joe took the strikers, or on both sets of the field. Breaking it up like that just was so much more efficient. And it utilizes all of us that we're all overlapping in our thinking anyways, that I have no question that Dan's going to talk to the defenders exactly about what I think they should be talking to him, what he should be talking to them about, and vice versa, because we're all on the same page, and it's just a matter of communicating that to the girls. So I really like how we've been breaking things up, like breaking the coaching up in practice. And again, like, I think that's a great way to look at it during the games too, and during warm-ups and games, is to break it up like that. Because we do have lots of coaches at games.
Exactly. And if you're watching, let's just say you're watching the back line, Abby, and Dan is watching the midfield, that's what you watch. You don't even care. You're not even looking at those midfielders. You're looking at that back line when they're in possession, when they're out of possession, what they're doing in between and transition. That's all you're looking at. And coaches will fall sometimes into that trap of watching the ball go around the field. Wherever it goes, they start watching the ball. And then their responsibility was to watch the back line, but they're watching when the ball goes into the midfield. They're watching.
And then we're doing what we're asking the girls not to do. We're the ones ball watching.
Yeah, exactly. So you have, just like we speak with the players about that selective perception, right? Mm-hmm. This is coaching selective perception, and you're just watching that back line, or you're just watching those forwards.
Well, and like in COVID, we had to drop down to only one or two coaches per the bench. And now I don't know if those regulations are lifted, but certainly, Ryan and Dan and I are all three on the bench for 11 games. And it would especially help during games for example, for me to watch the defense where my daughter doesn't usually play, and for Dan to watch the midfield where his daughter doesn't usually play. And then we're kind of killing at least two birds with one stone, where we're not hammering on our own daughters. We're not coaching our own daughters. And, but breaking up the field like that, I mean, shoot, in a 2010 game, what are there, like 5 carded coaches that could be on the bench? I mean, think of the coaching that we could be getting done during the game if all of us are watching a section of the field as opposed to the ball.
The player to coach ratio at the St. Louis Steamers games is something I've never seen before. I mean, because you're right, Abby. You have more. Sometimes you have almost as many coaches as you have players in it, and I'm not saying that sarcastically, but it's good because what you can do, and you did this a little bit too, Abby, in that game last Saturday. If you have that number of coaches, one just sits on the bench and talks to those players, because as well as I do, once those players come off, they're in la-la land. They have no idea, because they struggle they struggle to understand what they're watching anyway. It's just like parents. They struggle to understand what they're watching, so then they just give up after 10 seconds and then just start talking. But as a coach, if you can sit there, that too is like a practice. Talk to those girls on the bench, and if you have a couple coaches, one maybe watches the midfielders, one maybe watches the backs, and a third coach sits there on the bench with the 3 subs and says, okay, you watch the player who went in for you, and let's see if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Oh, on defense, she's supposed to be over on this side of the field because the wide back on the other team has it. But look where she's at, Susie Q. She's way over on the other side where you want to be. And maybe you have a little tactics board with some magnets, and you say, okay, here's where she wants to be. Let's see if she's actually there. And again, all you're doing is just trying to prime or condition her thinking. So when she does go in there and she does it correctly, great job. If she doesn't do it correctly, hey, remember, Susie Q, you wanted to be in this vertical channel when the ball was over on this side of the field. Remember what we said? Yeah, okay, then you make sure you get there. Make sure you get there, because that's lost time that unfortunately most coaches do not take advantage of. And really, the reason most coaches don't take advantage of it is because they become so emotionally wrapped up into what's happening on the field, they struggle to have a conversation with the girls or the boys who are sitting on the bench. Because as they're talking about it, they go, oh yeah, good pass. And then they focus back on those two girls. Oh yeah, it's good, go tackle. And they just commentate on the game because they struggle to emotionally disconnect from it. And that piece, like I said, it's a piece that's very valuable because most players always show up to games. So take advantage of every possible minute. I'll just give you one example personally. I hate riding on the bus to high school games. I hate it. I just hate the whole aspect of it. I hate being on a bus. I hate having to go to Kirkwood to then come back here to play Jabot at Order Park, to then have to drive back to Kirkwood and ride the bus. But that time, that 30 minutes on the bus, it's not Bill and myself just sitting there. Hey, what'd you do today, Bill? That's great. Yeah, I got to go shopping after. No, we get the tactics board out. We go around and we talk to players individually, and he's with one group and I'm with, but you waste no time. No time is wasted because you do not have enough of it.
See, I'll be the first one to admit it. I coached 2011 girls, and I'm the only one there. So when the girls come off, I focus on the field, and the girls that are on the bench, I don't know what they're doing.
Well, and I would argue, I mean, because that's my favorite thing to do is to sit with the girls and watch the game with them, because then they're not talking about Joe Schmo or whatever. They're focusing theoretically as best as they can. And we don't, everybody knows if you film a game, you sit and watch film, right? How many football teams and basketball teams watch film? Because it's really productive to watch how you just played. And it's really productive to sit there and talk to the girls about how their teammates are playing, therefore how they are playing. And I've thought about it before. Geez, if I sit down with the girls, what are the parents going to think? They're going to think I'm just sitting there doing nothing, but I don't really care. I've decided, because the parents, like, I don't know, Bill or Mike said, they don't know anyways. So even if I was the only coach there on the bench, they're going to get a lot more out of me talking to them one-on-one on the bench about what so-and-so just did on the field than me screaming at them on the field anyways. Even if I have to yell, get back, that's all retroactive. They're going to get back much further by paying attention to the game than if I yell at them. Very few times are you actually affecting anything on the field as a coach from the sideline. So sitting with the girls and discussing what they're seeing then could actually affect their play when they go back in.
When a coach.
Hey, Bill, hold on 1 second.
Sure.
I'm going to stop the recording. I actually have to fly out to Austin tonight for work. And I got to get to the airport. So my flight leaves at 9:55. So I'm going to stop the recording here, but I'm going to keep the Zoom line open, and then that'll allow you guys to continue to wrap up. I'm going to try to jump in on my car and listen in, but I just wanted to poke in here real quick just to let you guys know I'm going to stop the recording, and then you guys can continue.